Mr. Ballin, Danny and I are so excited to have you in studio. You're such a busy guy. You have a lot going on, but you made time for us, so we feel very honored. We have a new graphic novel. Let's start there. Tell us about this and why you wanted to adapt your storytelling to graphic novelty.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, it's funny that now I'm like this professional storyteller on the internet, because it wasn't that long ago I was in the military, and the transition into storytelling online was sort of a random one, which I'm sure we'll get into. But basically, now that we tell stories, the one thing we didn't have was a book. And when you think about where our stories historically, books is one of the main places. And since we have loads of video content and podcast content, we were like, we really need to get into print. But, we wanted to sort of take the magic from the videos that that's our fan base came from YouTube, really, and TikTok. That's a video format. We wanted to sort of take the magic of those videos and those stories and translate that to print versus just writing something down and calling it a book. And that's why we went with the graphic novel. It has that the images are part of the story. Also, I mean, one of the things that we found with our fan base is there's like this sense when I'm telling a story that it's sort of like I'm like your next door neighbor, just like talking to you, telling you a story. It's like a relatable person, but like part of the experience of listening to a MrBallen story is like MrBallen is with you. And so if you look in our graphic novel, you can actually see we added this little MrBallen character, which of course there we go. So if you can, maybe you can zoom in on that, right under my finger.
Oh
it's
my
like,
God! Wait, the artist nailed it. How do you feel about your caricature? Are you into it?
Oh yeah, no. There was many iterations.
Caricatures can go a lot of different ways. I've tried them on a boardwalk and cried, so I'm glad this one worked out for you.
Yeah, so it's like we got to just not only have the story be written the way we wanted it to be, but with these great images, and we have the little MrBallen IP that's like part of the experience.
I know, and I love that, because of course you were saying that wanting to go into like the written word and everything like that is a very important next step, but I love that you were able to marry that with how the fans know you from a visual sense, so it's a perfect little combination. Was this always, when you were brainstorming, like getting into book territory, was it always graphic novel, or did you kind of have a moment where you're like, oh, that makes perfect sense?
I think it was the latter. I mean, we definitely were batting around ideas for what we would want to do with a book, and by the time we were thinking about it, it's like Ballin Studios, the company that kind of is MrBallen. We were scaled up enough that we really didn't want to just put something out there. Not that we would do that, but it felt like this is a big move going into print. Like, this is traditional storytelling. We got to do it right, and we had batted around some concepts, and it was when we talked about the graphic novel. And it was like, that'll allow us that opportunity to kind of mimic that, like I said, the magic of having MrBallen be with you. It's visual, and so as soon as we began talking about it, it was like, of course, we got to do a graphic novel. And I'm so proud of how it came out. It's incredible.
Yeah, it looks amazing. And now Ballin Studios, it's everything. It's the podcast, it's this book, you're truly everywhere. But true crime, it's such a crowded space.
Sure.
What do you think was your secret sauce to breaking through in such a big way? It's so impressive.
Well, thank you. Well, honestly, we didn't necessarily break through with true crime. The origin story of how MrBallen came to be, because I was in the military for a while. I was a SEAL. I ended up getting medically retired from the SEAL teams at the end of 2017, which was sort of abrupt. And I was like suddenly a civilian again, trying to find my way. And over the course of those couple of years after I was out, I did some charity work and some consulting work, and nothing was really landing. But I was like really aware that the one place where it seemed like a lot of people were like making it big, or just like finding their place was content creation.
Yeah.
And I tried it, and it just failed miserably. I was like mimicking other content creators. I was doing like weird sketch comedy that wasn't funny. I've gone back and looked at it, and it's horrifically.
I want to see some of it. You need to send me the files.
It's been deleted from the internet, but and I remember it was like early 2020, right before the pandemic. I was basically ready to hang up the social media cleats at this point. Like, it's not going to work. No one's interested. And I was at this water park with my family in Pennsylvania, this indoor water park. And as we're about to go down to the water park, I just had I felt inspired to try one more thing on social media. And I was like, oh, there's this new thing, TikTok, which really hadn't become a thing yet. It's a new landscape, maybe it'll land better there. And I thought, why don't I post something that I personally am really interested in? Because to this point, I've been mimicking other creators and it's not working. And I've been so into like strange, dark, and mysterious true stories. Think like crazy unsolved mysteries. Like when I'm on YouTube and I'm eating lunch, like what am I gonna watch? I'm gonna watch like some wild unsolved mystery. And one of my favorites is the story about these hikers in the 1950s who go missing in the Ural Mountains. It's called the Dyatlov Pass Mystery. And the condensed version is these incredibly skilled hikers go out into the wilderness and they disappear. And the search party goes out to find them, and there are these famous pictures of when they find their campsite. Their campsite's in disarray. They've been cut open from the inside out. Like some of their clothes were left folded neatly inside of their tents. There's footprints that lead down to this forest, and there's 3 people that are dead hanging onto this tree. They had exchanged clothing. Men were wearing women's clothing and vice versa. Some of their bodies were radioactive. And so they're all found deceased. There's no solution, and at the same time, like a couple miles away, there was this huge military exercise happening. The Russian government was having this huge military exercise, and they began reporting lights and bizarre things happening over the Ural Mountains, having no idea these hikers have gone missing at the same time. So the Soviet government launches this investigation into what happened to these missing hikers, who are now deceased hikers. And they found something that caused them to say, an unknown, unnatural force caused their death, case closed, and then they wouldn't let people look into it. And so I told that story in 60 seconds on TikTok because I think it's a fascinating story, including some images, and I post it to my non-existent account on TikTok. There's no followers or anything. And I leave my phone in the room, and I go down to the water park with my kids, come back a couple hours later, and there's 5 million views on this video. And I've never gone even close to viral on anything to this point, so it was like totally overwhelming. I forget why I'm telling you this story, but this is how it came to be.
It's a good story.
I love because that makes a lot of sense, and I love that it just seems like you were saying, like you are a natural storyteller, which is why I'm kind of laughing that it was the last thought you had to pursue. Like when you were growing up, like were you always kind of like this, or were you a little shyer as a kid, or were you always kind of like an engaging, bubbly guy?
I was when I was in the military, my nickname was Shakespeare because all I did was like tell stories to the point where like, dude, enough. Like on deployments, like I'm just like riffing off stories. I just can't help it.
Wow.
And I think it's in part because my family are a bunch of professional storytellers. My father, Scott Allen, he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist from the Boston Globe, who now works at Ballin Studios. My sister, Evan Allen, also a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist from the Boston Globe, also works at Ballin Studios. My mom, Jessie Thuma, she wrote the majority of the podcast when we launched that. Not a Pulitzer Prize winner, but arguably the best writer in the family. She's incredible. It's like I have all these incredible writers in my family that now work within the studio. And ironically, I was like, I'm not interested in doing any of that stuff. But it wasn't until years later I ended up posting that video and became a storyteller. But I think that it's just something that I practically was raised to do. I was around, like I joke that as a kid, there were no short conversations. Everything is like long and drawn out. Like if you're sending a text, it's like 17 paragraphs long.
Y'all's holiday dinners go off.
The Allens love their work.
Yeah.
It's true.
Wow.
And so it's just sort of a thing that I've just always known I've been good at is storytelling.
That's awesome. And now you're doing it live on stage as part of a tour. Tell us about how this came to be. You've had a few shows already, and you have a big New York City show coming up, which is so exciting.
Yep.
Tell us about the tour.
Yeah, ironically, despite knowing I'm a pretty talented storyteller, I've actually always been paralyzed with fear when it comes to public speaking. But I've sort of developed this mantra over my life of just to do things that scare you, and so I constantly put myself in public speaking environments to try to get over it. Still not totally over it. But I finally pulled the trigger, this year to do this tour, the live tour for Ballin Studios. So we did 3 shows in Texas over the past 4 days. We were in Texas for 3 of those shows. It was Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, and thousands of people were at these shows, adoring fans, and it's this amazing experience. And as I'm waiting in the wings before the first show, it's like an out-of-body experience. I'm it's like, what have I done? I have to do the show. It's happening in 30 seconds. There's all these people. But it's like as soon as I walked out on stage for that first one and I hear the applause and I'm seeing these people that have made this whole thing even possible, it's like all fears went away. And it was just this incredible experience of getting to interact with these people that are they're the reason I'm here in the first place. It's incredible. So,
have you been adopting any pre-show rituals that's helping with the nerves, or is it just kind of staring into space and then running out on stage?
A lot of pacing.
Okay. You're getting your steps in.
A lot of pacing. drinking a lot of coffee and pacing, so like really building up the anxiety.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a perfect storm for that. Okay.
Yeah, no routine yet. I'm sure I'll develop one. Right now, I'm just trying to get through it. So, but it's actually a lot of fun. And the New York show we're doing, it's in about a week and a half, I think, at Town Hall. And my family's going to be there. It's going to be great. Like and also we're doing a show back home in Boston, Massachusetts, where I'm from, in Medford, Mass. And like all my friends from high school and college are going to be there. So it's really cool. The live stuff is something that is like a dream come true for me.
Fans that are going, what can they, like, is every show a little bit different? Like, what can they expect at a live show?
So it is a little bit different, and it's sort of because of the way I tell stories. So we do have a script for stories that we put up on videos and podcasts and for the live shows as well. But invariably, I don't look at the teleprompter. We have it, but I just kind of go out there and talk for about 2.5 hours. And during that time, I mean, the stories they're the same stories. We have a set list, but I'll like lean into aspects of the story depending on what the crowd is reacting to. So we had a show in Houston, that was the second show, where it was just a bigger venue, and so I noticed it was like I needed to be a little bit more concise about what I'm talking about, whereas like the more intimate shows, it's like everybody can hear and they can see me, and it's like really clear what I'm leaning into, and I can kind of go down rabbit holes a little bit easier, whereas a bigger crowd, you got to kind of throttle it back and make it much more clear. So yeah, it's the same. It's 5 stories plus a Q&A at the end, but there's some really cool sound effects, a really cool kind of set to it, and it's like stand-up comedy, but stand-up storytelling. It's me and a mic, and I'm just like vibing with the crowd.
And most times you're talking to a screen. How has it been interacting with your fans IRL? Like, how would you describe your fan base now that you're getting to know them in a more personal way?
It's crazy. You know, I don't even, the fan base is represented by so many walks of life. It isn't like that person probably is a MrBallen fan. It's completely random. Like there are young kids, like 10, 11-year-olds that come to these shows that are like wearing their flannels and they're so excited to meet me. And then there's like, the 75-year-old like Vietnam War veteran who's like crusty and like really intense and intimidating. Who's like, thank you, Mr. Ballin, for creating these stories. It's a whole spread, which is really cool. And I think it's in part because what I'm doing it's such a old school thing. It's storytelling. I mean, that's such a basic human form of entertainment that it really applies to a very broad audience, which I think is incredible. And it's certainly part of the reason why this has really grown, is it's not littered with like things that are designed to like, it's not like clickbait. Ultimately, our production is incredibly simple because it's really reliant on me telling you a story. Like first video to most recent video, yeah, it's better, no doubt. But the core of it is me yapping into a camera, telling stories.
And I don't know if you can answer this without giving away your upcoming plans, but
sure,
because you have covered so many different stories over the past few years, is there a story that you've just been like waiting to tell, or you're like, I don't really know the perfect way to go about? You know what I mean? Is there anything that you're like, one day I need to cover that, or maybe a topic?
Yes. So there was a story that actually my dad helped me put together. It's about Ernest Shackleton. Are you familiar with this? This could be an off-the-wall thing.
No.
It's one of the most famous survival stories of all time. Now, I'm going to reference what I think are the statistics, but you have to remember that this is off the cuff here. I was not prepared for the story.
Okay, we don't know anything.
Yeah,
this is off the cuff. So basically, in the early 1900s, I believe it was, this guy Ernest Shackleton, who's this incredibly famous explorer at the time, like in the world of like celebrities in the early 1900s, like pre-social media, pre-everything, Ernest Shackleton was like a big deal.
He was the man.
He was like going to the South Pole, and like the explorers were like big celebrities at the time, and he was sort of competing against this other explorer who was trying to reach the South Pole first. And the other explorer had more money, more funding, and was like seemingly just getting everything handed to him to go out and make his explorations to the South Pole. And Ernest Shackleton is like, he's had this run of bad luck where he keeps going out and he keeps having, it's actually a lot of his issues are his own fault. He'll go out, he'll begin his expedition to the South Pole, but he'll like bring the wrong map. He's like, sorry guys, I brought the wrong map. Or I didn't bring enough food. And it's like he had this kind of funny, like his reputation was he kept screwing it up, but he was such an incredible leader that he'd screw things up and they'd be like on death's door effectively, because you put us in this horrible position. We don't have enough food for the rest of the journey. But he'd be so good at keeping morale up that people kept coming back for these expeditions that always went badly. So he finally has this one expedition where he sets out for the South Pole, and I think his plan was he was going to cross the entire continent with sled dogs. He was the first person to do that. But as they're going out there, the sea freezes up around his ship, and it completely encases the ship in ice. They can't go anywhere, and they're basically forced to live out on the ice because their ship actually cracks from the ice and sinks, and they're forced to live on the ice with virtually no supplies for like a year.
Oh my God.
Like they end up like eating their own dogs and stuff, but nobody died.
Okay.
And they came back and they were like, I would do it again.
What?
But it's like this guy, the way they ended up getting out was not like, oh, the weather got better and they got out. It was like after over 180 days or something of being stuck on the ice. I'm not kidding. There's nothing but ice, okay? He and a handful of these guys are like, we're just gonna go hike out of here. There's nowhere to hike. You have to eventually go across the Bering Sea and like, there's nowhere to go. And he finds a little rowboat and like goes across one of the most treacherous waterways in the world. And he winds up on this little island, this little like whaling station. And he wanders up to the whaling station after like 200 days of being out in the wild. He's got this crazy beard. He's got like, he's skin and bone. And this little girl is like looking out the window and she sees this like man wandering, off the coast. They don't have any visitors. No one lives here besides this whaling station. And this guy straggles up and he's like, I'm Ernest Shackleton. And he's a celebrity. And everybody knows who he is, and they're like, "Oh my God!" So the gist is he saves everyone. No one dies on what it's like a doomed expedition, and people went back out with him afterwards. So the Ernest Shackleton story, which I probably butchered the figures.
Well, I'm hooked.
The
I'm
essence
excited
of
for you
the
to cover
story
it.
is there.
Yeah.
We're into it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so before we wrap up,
Yeah.
obviously a lot of your storytelling deals with the paranormal,
Sure.
which is so much fun. We're heading into Halloween season. What's your relationship with Halloween? Do you have any big fun plans with your kids? Like, what do you do there?
Yeah, well, my kids love Halloween. My wife Amanda she's a big decorator for the holidays, and so Halloween definitely we go all out. We got one of those at Home Depot. They sell those like 18-foot tall skeletons, which are all the rage. I think like Kim Kardashian might have put one up or something. So obviously you got to do that too. And so we put this huge skeleton up out front, and the kids they dress up in costumes. And I think this year one of my kids had talked about maybe going as MrBallen, which was a great honor. Flannel backwards hat, And it's funny, when we were living in Pennsylvania a couple years ago, right when the MrBallen thing sort of took off.
Yeah.
I mean, I basically wear this outfit every time I'm on camera.
It works for you.
And I'm like walking around the neighborhood, and no one knows I live there, and I saw people dressed as me with signs of like MrBallen. So it's like it's very cool. I didn't talk to him or anything, but it's like that's pretty. And my kids saw it. They think it's so cool. So
cool.
Halloween's a big deal. Yeah. So maybe this year one of my kids will go as me. That'd be a great honor.
Oh, okay. Well, you have to keep us posted because I hope that happens for you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
stopping by.
Awesome, and I hope you guys enjoyed the book. It's coming out. It's out right now, actually. It's worldwide. So MrBallen, The Strange, Dark, Mysterious, the graphic stories, 9 stories in there. There are 4 new, 5 OG remasters. They're excellent. We're really proud of this book. You should definitely check it out.